Hello, everybody. Welcome to yet another lecture at AAT Learning Hub. My name is Anita Chandrasekhar, and I'm going to take you for a walk into the heart. It's going to be real basics like the ABCs of the heart, the nuts and bolts of what makes the heart beat. But hey, I'm also going to intersperse the talk with clinical bits of information that may be quite useful. So, follow carefully. Let's have an overview of what we are going to cover today. I call it today's roadmap. We will dissect the heart to know more about the various chambers, the great vessels of the heart, how the blood flows within the heart, the valves of the heart, the coronary system, and the conduction system of the heart that fires the impulses. The heart is a miraculous organ of extreme precision and great resilience, a marvel construction by an intelligent design that is unsurpassed by any man-made creation. There are various components that act in harmonious way to make the heart beat around 100,000 times a day for an average adult. The complex coordinated network for every cell and every component of the heart leads to efficient cardiac output to the body. Now, why is heart such a special organ? Because life begins when the heart starts beating at 21 days of fetal life. And when the heart stops beating, death is declared. There is no other organ in the body that determines the birth of life and death as the heart. Now let's move on to the basic anatomy of the heart. This is a two-dimensional view from the anterolateral aspect. To be honest, the heart being a three-dimensional structure, there is no one view that can demonstrate the heart in its entirety. So we will keep switching the views to learn all of the aspects. Now, let's deep dive into the various components. The heart's basic structure consists of 4 chambers surrounded by muscular walls. The 2 upper chambers are called the atrium or the atria in plural, the right atrium and the left atrium, and the 2 lower chambers are called the right ventricle and the left ventricle. Then there are these 8 great vessels beginning with the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava that drain the deoxygenated blood from the upper and lower parts of the body into the right atrium. Then we have the greatest of the great vessels, which is the aorta, that arises from the left ventricle and gives branches to all parts of the body. Then you have the main pulmonary artery that arises from the right ventricle and bifurcates into the left and the right pulmonary artery. There are 4 pulmonary veins, 2 on each side, the right superior pulmonary vein and the right inferior pulmonary vein on the right side, the left superior pulmonary vein and the left inferior pulmonary vein on the left side. So these constitute the 8 great vessels of the body. Next, you have the 4 valves in the heart, which actually guide the blood flow within the heart. There are 2 atrioventricular valves, which are situated between the atrium and the ventricle. And there are 2 semilunar valves, which are situated between the ventricle and the great vessels. For example, the tricuspid valve, as the name indicates, has 3 cusps, is situated between the right atrium and the right ventricle. The pulmonary valve is situated between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery. Similarly, on the left side, you have the mitral valve, which is the bicuspid valve, which is situated between the left atrium and the left ventricle, and the aortic valve is between the left ventricle and the aorta. There is a thick band of muscular tissue that divides the right and the left ventricle, which is called the interventricular septum. There is a little thinner layer of muscular tissue between the left and the right atrium, which is the interatrial septum, which you cannot see in this picture because it is behind the great vessel. Now let us see how blood flows within the heart. The deoxygenated blood from the superior and the inferior vena cava, along with the deoxygenated blood from the coronary sinus, drains into the right atrium and through the tricuspid valve moves into the right ventricle. The right ventricle pumps this blood through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary arteries. The pulmonary arteries carry these blood onto the lungs. The blood gets oxygenated and then it goes via the pulmonary veins into the left atrium, which moves through the mitral valve into the left ventricle, and that gets pumped into the aorta through the aortic valve and to remaining parts of the body. Now let's check out how it looks in real motion. So this is a 3D animated video to understand how all the components work in unison to facilitate the flow of blood. Now you can see that the valves of the heart and the walls of the heart are working synchronously to allow efficient pumping of the blood. Now, what if one of these components are not in order? Either the valves or the great vessels or the chambers, if any of it is not working very well, it can lead to a spectrum of disease conditions, which can either be congenital, that is present at birth, or acquired, that happens during the course of life. So it can lead to a multitude of diseases like congenital heart disease, valvular heart disease, coronary artery disease, aortic diseases, or something to do with the muscle of the heart like cardiomyopathy or endocarditis or myocarditis or some such stuff. This is how the heart actually looks. It's a real close magnified image of the heart in the surgical field. You can see the great vessel, the aorta, and the pulmonary artery to the left of it. The small flickering chamber here is the right atrium. The outpouching of the right atrium is called the right atrial appendage. Similarly, there is a left atrium and left atrial appendage towards the left posterior side of the heart. These are important, particularly the left atrial appendage, because there are regions of blood stasis, and therefore they can be a site for clot formation, especially in conditions of abnormal heart rhythms when atrium does not contract, like in conditions like atrial fibrillation. The anterior aspect of the ventricle that you're seeing is the right ventricle, and the left ventricle is more lateral and posterior behind the pericardium. So let's now move on to the valves of the heart. The valves consists of leaflets or cusps that allow unidirectional flow of blood with no reverse movement. For example, blood flows from atria to the ventricles and on to the great arteries, and the valves prevent any backward flow or leak. The upper two valves that you're seeing here are the atrioventricular valves, that is the tricuspid valve and the bicuspid or the mitral valve. The lower two valves are the ventriculo-arterial valves or the semilunar valves. The semilunar valves are named such because their cusps are reminiscent of a half moon. Now let's check out the valves in motion. The cusps of the AV valves are attached to chordae tendineae that you can see when the valve is opening, which is anchored to the papillary muscle of the ventricular wall, and they help in the opening and closing of the valve. The four valves sit in real close proximity in roughly similar planes and are enclosed in what is called the fibrous skeleton of the heart. The fibrous skeleton helps to maintain the valve's shape and provides a structure to which the valve cusps can attach. Now, if there are any issues with any of the valves, there are four valves, and either it can have a stenosis or a regurgitation. So it can lead to valvular regurgitation or valvular stenosis conditions in either of the four valves. Like you can have tricuspid stenosis or tricuspid regurgitation, mitral stenosis or mitral regurgitation, aortic stenosis or aortic regurgitation, and so also pulmonary stenosis or pulmonary regurgitation. Next, let's deal with the coronary system. The coronaries are basically the blood supply to the heart that feed the heart muscle with oxygen and nutrients. They run on the surface of the heart, and that's why they are called epicardial coronary arteries. They are the first branch of the aorta just above the aortic valve. There are two types of coronary systems, the left coronary system and the right coronary system, which you will see in the next slide. The left main coronary artery rises from the left coronary sinus of the aortic root and bifurcates into left anterior descending artery, which gives diagonal and septal branches. The left anterior descending artery is the main coronary artery of the heart, and it supplies the entire anterior wall of the left ventricle, the interventricular septum, and the LV apex. The other branch of the left main coronary artery is the left circumflex artery that goes behind the pulmonary artery and goes to the lateral part of the heart and gives rise to obtuse marginal branches. This shows the right coronary system. The right coronary artery arises from the right coronary sinus of the aortic root. The right coronary artery gives rise to two major branches, the posterior descending artery and the posterior left ventricular artery. There are other branches as well, like the sinus nodal artery, the right ventricular artery, acute marginal artery, and the atrioventricular nodal artery. There are anatomical variations in the coronary system that one can differentiate as right dominant and left dominant coronary system. This is based on the artery that supplies the inferior wall of the left ventricle. Now, for example, in this, the posterior descending artery or the PDA comes from the right coronary artery, which means this is a right dominant system. There may be cases when the PDA can arise from the circumflex artery, which is called the LPDA, and that becomes a left dominant system. So you can see here how the coronaries are in action. The heart muscle is pumping away to glory. The epicardial coronary arteries are actually nourishing the heart and helping them pump effectively. The middle coronary artery that you're seeing, which is the largest coronary artery, the LAD, is one of the most significant coronary arteries. Any atherosclerosis or thrombotic occlusion of this vessel can cause myocardial infarction, which is commonly called as the heart attack, and that can involve large areas of anterior, septal, and apical portions of the heart muscle, leading to serious impairment of cardiac function. Now let's move on to the last section of the talk. Now, what is this? It almost looks like an octopus with tentacles, isn't it? Well, not really. So, although the heart is a mechanical pump, there needs to be some kind of a mechanism to tell each of the chamber when to contract and when to relax, and that mechanism is the conduction system, which delivers electrical signals to different chambers at different times. Electrical impulses are originated from a specialized tissue called the sinoatrial node, which is touted as the natural pacemaker of the heart. It is located in the superior posterior aspect of the right atrium. The frequency of these impulses are governed by a balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Next, the impulse moves on to what is called as the atrioventricular node, which is located in the inferior aspect of the interatrial septum. If SA node is the pacemaker of the heart, the AV node is a kind of a gatekeeper of the electrical impulses, and it helps regulate the heartbeat. The impulses then travel through the bundle of His or the atrioventricular bundle on to the left and the right bundle branches, which is then transmitted on to the terminal fibers called the Purkinje fibers, which transmit the impulses onto the ventricular walls. Now let's check out the conduction system firing impulses. Now, you can see the consequence of the conduction system leading to rapid and nearly simultaneous contraction of the right and the left ventricle in a waveform that actually starts inferiorly at the cardiac apex and travels towards the valve that improve the efficiency with which the ventricle ejects the blood. Any interruption or any derangement in this pathway can lead to what is called an arrhythmia, which can either be tachyarrhythmias or bradyarrhythmias depending on the site and type of the disarray. Now that brings us to the end of this session, but I have one more task for you. Did you notice one tiny little image of a pearl dropping in between in some of these slides with a rolling sound? Those are what I call as clinical pearls. You remember I promised you some clinical tidbits of information in the beginning of the lecture? If you listen to the lecture keenly, do you know how many clinical pearls I dropped during this session? Type below in the comment section. Also feel free to type in any of your opinions, feedback about the video, or any requests you have for subsequent videos. We love hearing from you. And if you enjoyed this video, if you feel it could benefit any of your friends, feel free to give a share. And I hope you're hungry for more. Tune in next Sunday for yet another lecture from AAT Learning Hub. Until then, stay focused and stay curious. Bye-bye.